Hi everyone, it's Levex again, back today on 50 Shades of Play to talk more about BDSM and the wonderful world that exists under that massive umbrella. So, before I start today, I'm going to give a big thanks and shout out to the Reddit r BDSMAdvice, which is what inspired us to do this little shebang. And if you are looking for BDSM advice, or if you think you could help other people out that have questions, that's a great place to go, and I totally recommend it. So here I am today talking about consent. And consent is a topic that is generally considered pretty straightforward, which is generally a good thing. But today we're going to get into the more complicated nuances that come along with consent that often don't get discussed. We say that consent is very easy in the sense that if someone says yes, they're consenting, someone says no, they're not consenting. But we're going to look into things like gray areas where someone doesn't know what they're consenting to very well, or they have a big idea of what they're getting into and they give a blanket consent without a full understanding, or situations where you have someone that has given their consent and then they get nervous and they take that consent away, but then they give it again and then they take it away. And how do you process that? How do you react to that? So changing consent, is it okay to do? Is it not okay? How do you deal with that? And the fact that consent over time can be something that evolves. You might say on day one, this isn't something that I want to do, I'm not okay with that. And then, day 30, you might say, actually, I want to do this now. So how do you transition consent from a no to a yes, or even a yes to a no? Because that's okay too. If you try something and you don't like it, how do you take away your consent if you've decided it's not for me? And the thing we're going to talk about first is how to discuss it, because consent often involves your interests and your limits. And while these things can be very intrinsic to the self, talking about them can be really hard. So how do you talk to someone about what you consent to? And how do you accept when someone either doesn't like what you are consenting to, or is really eager about something that you say no to? Because that can be a bit difficult if you want to participate in activities with someone. You don't want to let them down, or you're worried that they'll judge you, or whatever the case may be. This actually can become a little complicated, especially in BDSM, where there's so much to do, and in a lot of cases you don't necessarily know where you want to start, what exactly you're interested in, and what people might bring your way. So that's a bit of an overview. Okay, so today we're talking about consent, as I said, and where we're going to start is, why is consent so important, and how do you communicate around consent? And we like to believe that it's very straightforward. If you say, yes, I want to do something, no, I don't want to do something, that's the difference in consent. You also, of course, have to keep in mind that if you don't have consent, you may be being abusive, you may be committing a crime, and that can be, of course, dangerous to your partner, it can be dangerous to you. It's generally not a good thing to not have consent. So when we practice BDSM, we often say that consent is the cornerstone to the practice. If you have consent with a willing partner, you want to be risk aware, you want to be, you might want to be safe and sane if you prefer that model. But the cornerstone is always consent. So our partners have acknowledged what we want to do, and we've acknowledged their limits, they've acknowledged ours, and vice versa. So past the fact that it's extremely important to always have consent, how do you discuss consent, and what are some things you really need to be aware of when you're discussing consent? The big thing that I see a lot is in regards to limits. Is it okay to have these limits? How do I express these limits? And what happens if a person says they have no limits? If someone just says no limits, are they consenting to absolutely everything? And my general thought on that matter is no, they are not consenting to absolutely everything. They may have simply just not thought of everything. And that is where the communication becomes extremely important. When two people are discussing consent, I think one of the main things to keep in mind is that we don't know everything. Like, even about ourselves, we don't know everything. So when I go into a consent discussion with a potential partner, if I was looking for one, I might say, my limit is my feet. Don't touch my feet. Never ever touch my feet. And they might say, okay, I won't ever touch your feet. How do you feel about cleaning the bathroom? And I might say, oh, well, I don't have any limits about cleaning the bathroom. You want me to clean the bathroom? I'll clean the bathroom. And their idea might be, ho, this is great. I'm gonna make her lick the toilet bowl clean. Meanwhile, I'm thinking they mean literally clean the bathroom with like a plunger and a scrub brush. And the second they say lick the toilet bowl, I'm gonna be like, oh, wow, no, you didn't say you were gonna make me lick the toilet bowl. I'm not doing that, because I'm a germaphobe and I don't want nothing to do with toilet bowls. So there's an example of how easy it is to say, oh yeah, whatever, I consent to cleaning the bathroom, without realizing that a person might have a completely different idea of what that means. So it's very important to be clear when you're talking about consent about what you mean. Would you be okay with cleaning the bathroom? What if I asked you to lick the toilet bowl clean? Would that be something you would consent to? If I want you to lick the floor clean, is that something you consent to? That's a lot different than just saying, do you consent to me forcing you to clean my bathroom? Other examples are simple language differences. If someone says consensual non-consent, they might mean specifically and only rape play. And I myself, when I use C&C, consent, non-consent, I mean pretty much strictly non-sexual BDSM. So like no rape play at all when I say it. So completely different. So you put me and them in the same room and we both go, yeah, I'm fine with C&C. We both mean completely different things. So when you're discussing consent, it's very, very important to assess not just your limits and their limits, but also the knowledge base. What are we talking about? What are we agreeing to? And admitting to instances where I don't know. And saying I don't know can be really hard. It's basically the virgin card of BDSM. I've never done it. I don't actually know how I'm gonna react. I might have fantasized about it, I might have thought about it, I've seen it, I've imagined it, I've wanted it, I'm afraid of it, but I've never done it. And the thing there is that fantasy and reality can have really big differences. When you do something that you think might be awesome, it might be horrible. Like, I thought I would be great at getting hooks in me. I was like, yeah, I can totally do that. And whew, let me tell you, I'm not very good at it. I cry like a baby and it scares me half to death. So fantasy and reality, big difference. So when you're saying, I consent to this, it's very good to admit, I haven't done it. I don't know how I'm gonna react to this. I think that I will have fun. I feel like I'm really scared of it, whatever the case may be. And this allows you and your partner to approach it in a proactive manner of exploration, which gives you the ability then to say, wait a minute, I don't like this and I would like to withdraw my consent. Or I really like this and now I would like to consent to it on a more permanent basis. And if you don't do that, if you go into a situation where you say, you know, I've seen this in a porn and I think it's gonna be freaking awesome, so I totally consent to this, and then they are like, oh, awesome, and they go 100 miles an hour, and you don't like it. And suddenly you're in the middle of a situation where I told this person I'm okay with this and that I really wanted to do it, and now it's horrible. What do I do? Can I say no? And I mean, to be fair, if you've been like, yeah, I want to do it, and then in the middle of it, you're like, no, wait, this is awful, I don't like it. You're going to confuse them. You're probably going to feel a little confused, and it's going to be a really awkward, difficult, bad situation that isn't going to be comfortable or fun for anyone. So when dealing with consent, acknowledging your knowledge and your experience becomes very important to avoid pitfalls of expectation that you've set yourself or your partner up to. So here is where we emphasize, as always, that communication is key. And while it's uncomfortable to say, I don't know, I might not be good at it, never tried it. Like, there's always a sense of, am I going to disappoint this person by not being good at this? But generally speaking, that communication is going to be very, very worth it, and it's going to help you both. So that's my thoughts on communicating responsibly about your limits and interests towards consent when you're looking into activities with a BDSM partner. So now that we've sort of considered why consent is so important and how communicating it can be, a bit of a challenge, and the gray areas there with knowledge and responsibility towards where we're not entirely knowledgeable, I'm going to move into changing consent. And changing consent is, of course, a bit of a slippery slope. You have the case where, say you've involved yourself in an activity, and someone has said, I don't want to do this thing, so that's a limit of mine and we're not going to do it. And you've acknowledged that and accepted that as a limit. So you go into your activities and you're mid-activity, and suddenly they say, do that thing that I said was my limit. Then you're in the position, of course, where you have to decide, do I take that at face value and go with it? Or do I acknowledge the fact that this is a stated limit that we've discussed, so I shouldn't, even though they want it in the moment? What happens if you go with the invitation and then they say, no, it was supposed to be a limit, why did you do it? Did they intentionally trap you? Was it a mistake in the heat of the moment? And these can be really difficult to deal with. And this is something that will probably come down, in a lot of cases, I think, to personal preference and how well you know your partner. If you've just met someone, for instance, and you don't really know them, or you've only practiced a few times, so you don't really know the ins and outs of their personality or their preferences, it might not be a good idea to go along with changing consent in the middle of an activity, because there are dangers and there are pitfalls, and it might go wrong. It might go right, of course, and you can always hope that, if they want it, they want it, and we can do it then, especially if it's an activity you really wanted to do. But tempering that, I think you really have to take the responsibility for saying, I'm confident in this, and I can do it in a way that they can back out of if they change their mind again. Or you need to be able to say, no, I might want it, and you might say you want it now, but we discussed it, and when we discussed it, it was a no. So until we have the time to sit down and actually discuss the workings, like, why have you changed your mind? Are you sure that you've changed your mind? You're not just doing it to please me in the heat of the moment? Whatever. There's 1,000 reasons why people might change their mind. Like, if they decide in the middle of something awesome, this person is amazing, and I actually do trust them, so I totally want them to do it. The heat of the moment isn't the best time to make these decisions, even though it can feel really good and you can feel really sure. But in BDSM, we have headspace, and I'm not going to explain that too deeply, but basically when you're involved in BDSM, you're getting a lot of adrenaline, you're getting dopamine, you're getting endorphins, and this can alter your perception. It's kind of like drugs or alcohol. It's your signal substances, and this can affect your decision making. So if you try to change your consent when you're in the middle of activities and you're affected by your chemicals, say you're in subspace or you're in dom space or kitten space or whatever space you are in, you might try to change your decision based on how you've been affected by what you're doing. And you might not agree with that when you're clear-headed. So changing consent can be risky. And it's something that I personally feel like it's not a good idea. Like with my partner, he gets to make the calls on most of our consent things. So he knows me really well, and I'm able to trust him to take these decisions with the knowledge of how I tend to react to different activities. But in most cases, even as a couple that is, we've been working together for quite some time now, we don't change things in the middle. And we usually don't do brand new things without talking about them, usually pretty extensively, to make sure that we're both on board and that we understand what's happening. So even if I'm, la-di-da, this is so great and this person is the best and I've trusted him for years, so it's going to be fine, we don't spring new things because, well, accidents can happen, mistakes can happen, and if you know someone really well, you might know if something will freak them out, but even then, people can surprise you with their reactions. Like, you might have forgotten to talk about the time that when you were a kid, you got a pencil shoved up your nose by your classmates, so you're scared of having pencils shoved up your nose, and then, your partner's like, haha, I'm gonna stick my finger up their nose to humiliate them, and suddenly this is a really big deal because they have a panic attack. So new things, even if they're like, yes, humiliate me in the best way you can, even though yesterday I said don't do that, they might freak out. Even though in the altered state, they're saying, do it, do it, do it. So here's an area where be careful. Take it with precaution. If you feel like changing consent is something that will become a part of your relationship, discuss it. What are the risks of changing consent in motion? What might go wrong? If something goes wrong, who's bearing the burden of the responsibility? If you do something where your partner has said, I've changed my mind, I want you to do this after all, is it their fault? Is it your fault? I don't think it's anyone's fault. I think it's a mutual responsibility where you can both say, okay, I thought I wanted it, I made a mistake, you went along with it, you made a mistake, we both made a mistake. This is something we share together. Of course, it could work out really great. Again, this is where it becomes something where it's very personal, and is something that you should communicate very clearly. And what you're going to do to deal with it if it doesn't go well, if you decide to allow this kind of change in motion, as I would call it. One thing we have seen as well is giving a wide consent, such as, I would like you to be able to slap me, so you can slap me. And then I believe what happened was, if I remember correctly, was the person with their partner got slapped a few times and that was fine, but then during another BDSM activity, they decided to slap the person's face. And the face was never discussed, and the person felt in the middle of that, well, I've been slapped in the face, that's not okay. I don't like this, don't slap my face. And they felt like, am I being abused because I've just been slapped in the face? But I said it was okay for them to slap me. So is this just an honest mistake? Is it, was he trying to actually do something I didn't consent to? And that's another area where you need to look at mistakes can happen, we're human, and communication is really key, and being clear about it. I consent to slap you consent to slap me. Where are we slapping? Like, it sounds like straightforward, yeah, you're gonna slap me, that's okay, but if someone is not wanting to be slapped in the face, and they don't consent to that, but the person doesn't understand that, this is where we see consent not being super easy, where a mistake is easy to make. So you have to be cautious and communicate that. So that's talking about what I consent to and what I might want to add to my consent, and if that's okay. But what about someone taking away consent? And this, of course, we like to say that that's pretty straight up, where I say, nope, don't do this anymore, and you stop immediately because I have withdrawn my consent. Now, another thing we've seen in a few cases is they said, no, stop, and then they said, oh yeah, it's okay, actually, do it, and then no, stop, and then, oh, actually, it's okay, we can keep doing it, just be a little different, like do it a little slower, no, stop, oh, actually, it's fine. And this creates a lot of confusion, and this is another place where you really need to think about how you communicate consent. And if withdrawing consent, of course, being a pretty serious thing, if someone is saying yes, no, understanding how they want to express a no, and being able to say you've said no, and that means we're done, even if you say you want it now, becomes important. If people change their minds a lot and show a blurred line in their consent, it can become dangerous for both parties, because the person that is wishy-washy and changing their minds, if they don't actually know how they feel about it in 3 weeks time, when they've had, a period to think on it and sort their feelings out, they might decide, you're an abusive bastard, don't come near me. And that's not necessarily fair of them. And it's, it's a difficult situation to be in. But this is a case where you have to look at what are they saying in the heat of the moment, and what are they saying out of the heat of the moment, and what takes precedence. And what I would generally say is that if you have a structure where you have safe words, or you have, if no really means no, or stop means stop, then if someone says stop, it should probably be a stop, at least in my opinion, because in that case, if they change their minds back and forth, it can lead to confusion, it can lead to disappointment or an upset. Misunderstandings are very easy in these situations. So when someone withdraws their consent, I think it's very important to say, okay, we're taking a step back and we'll discuss it, sort it out, and figure out where we want to go from there, instead of going back and forth, back and forth. So that sort of covers, deciding you do want something in the middle of things, deciding you don't want something in the middle of things, and some of the mistakes that can happen if you give a sort of a broader range when specifics come up. I guess the next we'd probably talk about is probably alternate consent models, where you're dealing with safe words or a lack of safe words, and so forth. So next we'll talk about the alternate consent models, and basically what that means is there's different ways to handle consent. We know what consent is, so how do we enforce it? And in a lot of cases people will do this by using safe words, in addition to having discussed things that are off limits or are soft limits. And of course a hard limit is this is absolutely not happening, and a soft limit is generally we can approach this, we might be able to give it a try slowly but surely, or in whatever fashion they feel is controlled enough to attempt approaching a subject or activity that they're not sure about. So first and foremost, of course, safe words are pretty straightforward. A safe word means stop. There's no consent anymore, I'm taking my consent away. And these are really good in situations where a partner enjoys being able to say no freely without worrying about the connotations of that. Like if my owner is caning my legs really hard and I don't handle canes very well because, wow, do they hurt? But I might start going, no, as an instinct. I don't mean no to him. I mostly mean like, no, I can't handle this pain. But if we didn't have a consent model, that no might have meant no, stop, and then he would of course have a need to stop if that was part of our consent model. But in a situation like that, having a safe word, your partner knows, well, she's saying no, but that's not the safe word, so I can keep caning away. So in that situation, if I really needed him to stop because it hurt too much, then I could be like red or pineapple, or meatloaf is a comical one. But whatever your safe word is, you use it, you're withdrawing consent, and that should absolutely mean stop, we're done, no more, thanks, let's step back and probably have a discussion, have some aftercare if you're into aftercare, whatever the case may be. But safe word, great method for withdrawing consent in a way that everyone is very clear on. A secondary model along the lines of safe word is what's called the traffic light system. And that system basically says, if I say green, that means we're good to go, I'm enjoying this, I'm having fun. Yellow might mean I'm starting to have trouble, maybe slow down a bit, change what you're doing. It's sort of a warning sign, like it's getting to be a little bit too much, so dial it back, but don't stop. I want to keep going. Red, again, stop, problem, gotta call it now. This is the end of the line. We're gonna have to give it a break. So red would be the withdrawal of the consent, green would be the enthusiastic, let's go, and yellow would be the, ooh, let's slow down a little and change things up to make sure that we can keep going. And these, of course, have to be discussed on how they're gonna work for each partnership. Some people will use other devices, but these are the main ones. You can have non-verbal versions that can involve anything from like squeezing a squeak toy means stop, or dropping something that makes a lot of noise when it hits the floor can mean stop. There's a lot of different models for that, but those are the basic ideas. Being able to withdraw your consent in a way that is very obvious and clear for the parties involved, and being able to, if you prefer, to give a step ladder instead of immediately saying nope, being able to say, I want to keep going, but I need this to change a bit because it's getting to be too much. So those are two of the core consent models. And then, of course, a bit more controversial, but still pretty common from what I've seen, is more blanket consents. And I use a blanket consent with my partnership, though it didn't start that way. When I started with my partner, I had very hard limits, like don't touch my feet, no sexual stuff, and so forth. And those were very important to me. But as a person with a lot of anxiety, I struggle using safe words because I will question myself. Am I doing this wrong? Am I not challenging myself enough? I can come up with 1,000 reasons why, instead of focusing on what's happening and what I need, I'll get worried about if I'm doing it right. So using a safe word for me actually starts to become dangerous and might impede my ability to consent or not consent. So instead of having a safe word or a stoplight model, I used a discussion model, which is basically, before we began, we discussed, these are my limits, these are what I can't do, these are the things I'm interested in, but they scare me, so please approach them slowly. I would like to try them, but afterwards, I need to be able to say I never want to do it again if I didn't like it. These are the things I'm like enthusiastic about, so, and let's go, and so forth. So the discussion model can be useful if you're a person that struggles with the use of safe words, or if you don't know a lot about the activities that you're going into and you want to try them, but you don't know how far it's going to go. So you can use the model where you say, I want you to do these things, but if I react in this way, I need you to stop. Or if, say my owner wanted to spank me, but I struggle with being spanked, so if I start crying, I want you to stop spanking me. That can be a way of dealing with your consent. If you are a person like me that has trouble with safe words. Other models include from this hour to this hour, like during this period of time, I would like to explore this. So this is a way for us to step into this space and get into the headspace of this. But once this time is up, we need to stop and then figure out, was it okay? Did we enjoy it? Do we want to expand on that in the future? Is there something we need to change next time? And that can be a way to basically explore a little more freely, but also within constraints that allow you to know that this is only going to go so far. Some people use models where if I'm wearing a certain piece of clothes, you're allowed to come at me without asking. Or if I have a song playing on my CD player, that's a signal that I'm in the mood for you to do this kind of activity with me. So there's a lot of ways to initiate consent that you need to discuss and plan for and prepare for and have set up. But it doesn't always have to be 100% direct. We're starting, we're ending, And this is all of it. So long as you've discussed it and set it up so that you're able to work within the confines of your consent box, you might call it, then you should be okay to try different things. When you're getting into a more blanket consent, free use, consensual non-consent, or like in my case, I am property to my owner and he gets the final say. I don't have a safe word. I'm not allowed to say no, which can sound very, very extreme, but this is something we built up to over time. And basically how that works is, after many, many discussions and a lot of practice in our play, we came to the agreement that we wanted to be owner property, and he is able to say, I accept the responsibility that if I choose to do something to you that you don't like, I will take care of it if there is a severe problem. So, like I said, my feet are my limit. Like, if my foot gets grabbed, I can have a panic attack, and that can be dangerous for me. It can be dangerous for him or anyone in my way if I go flailing like a crazy person. So he accepts that if he chooses to do that activity, there might be a panic attack and there might be a lot of fallout for that. And then he would, of course, have to take care of me, take care of anyone that was affected by it, take care of himself, and he wouldn't be able to look at me and go, you had a panic attack, silly girl, which he would never do, thankfully, because he's great. So accepting responsibility when there's a blanket consent is very important. If you know someone well enough to understand that just because they don't have limits doesn't mean there aren't things that will be problems, you need to be able to manage those problems. And that means knowing that just because you can doesn't mean you should. So, for instance, I use myself as an example because I feel really weird using other people. It doesn't seem very fair to them. So, being nervous and anxious around hooks and needles, my partner's very into them. So I have said, of course, with my blanket consent, he's my owner, he gets to decide. He will ask me, how are you feeling today? How are your nerves? Are you feeling anxious? And I can say, well, I'm on a scale of 1 to 10 of 4 today. I feel pretty good. I'm confident. I'm not too worried. And he might say, okay, well, we're going to do hooks today. How do you feel about that? And I'll respond with, no. I mean, like, it'll look awesome if you can do it, but I can't do that. Like, I can't. I'll freak out. It's going to be horrible. And he will say, we're going to try it, and I will take the responsibility. And if you freak out, it's okay. And I will take care of you. And he does. And I actually have gotten to the point where I don't freak out anymore. Last time at least, I didn't cry. So that was a big step in the right direction, and I'm pretty proud of it. But you can have cases where consent grows to the point of knowing someone where you can accept the risk. But this is something that I advise to work up to over time. Don't just jump into saying, do the thing if you want to, because it's hard and those risks can be pretty severe. If my partner, for example, put a hook in me and I freaked out and ripped the hook out, then he would have to take me to the hospital to get stitches, and it would be a big deal. And the thing about that is I know that he has the equipment here to put on like a temporary bandage. I know he has the equipment here to get everything gauzed up and safe, and I know he has the time and the knowledge to get me to the nearest emergency room, and I know that he will stay there in the hospital with me. So I'm extremely confident that if we had a problem like that, he will take the full responsibility. And when you're giving a blanket consent or following a model of consent that's very broad, that gives a lot more power over to the other side, it's very important to know how they will handle issues that come up when they decide to do something that is under consensual non-consent. So, and that is, of course, consenting to have them do something to you that you're not necessarily okay with. So, let's see, that covers I think that might actually cover all of it. The essence is, of course, that communicating your consent and understanding your partner is very important. And being aware that making mistakes in consent is as easy as misunderstanding a use of language or the use of a term. If you use different terms with a slightly different meaning, which is common in BDSM because BDSM is very personal. So consent sounds easy from the get-go. It's a concept that we are able to say, yeah, this is straightforward, no means no, yes means yes, we're good. But there's a lot more to it that you need to think about, or at least I think you need to think about when you're getting involved into BDSM and activities with risk, where people can be hurt emotionally, physically, or mentally. And it's very important to be aware of that. So when you're working with a partner, a new partner, an old partner, if you want to make sure things are smooth and everyone is enjoying themselves, communicate. Make sure you understand consent for different activities. Does slap mean slap everywhere, or does it only mean on the ass? Does CNC mean I can force you to do something that you don't want to do, or does it just mean rape play? Hopefully those are enough examples to get my meaning across, and I think so. So talk to your partners, make sure you have consent, and when there is no defined consent, when people don't know, that's okay. And it's good to talk about, it's good to accept and admit. And if people say, no, that's a limit, can't do that, I don't consent to that, then accept it. We're not all the same, and it's okay to have limits. If you really need something that someone has as a limit, it's not necessarily the end of the world. You can always look into, can I do this with another partner? Will that be a problem? And so forth. But in some cases, you just have to accept that if I want to play with this person, it's not in their card deck, so we're not going to do that. And that's perfectly okay. Never blame a partner or try to convince a partner that their limits are not acceptable, because we all have limits for whatever reason we have them, and it's very important to respect ourselves and each other when it comes to them. Because that's part of what makes us who we are. If we didn't have those, well, we'd all be the same, and that would get kind of boring. Or maybe it would be really fun. Either way. So, risk-aware, consensual, kink, or SSC, whichever you prefer. Have fun. Enjoy your BDSM safely, and, well, as safely as you can, being aware of the risks, and enjoy.